must be nerve-wracking. But debuting for the UFC is a whole different ballgame. Competing on the biggest stage of them all, knowing whichever way this fight goes can make or break your career. So in today's video, we're going to be looking at the times when fighters have been the least successful in our 10 worst UFC debuts. And be sure to stick around to the end of the video to see our favorite comments from the last one. Ben Askren. This moment just might be as controversial as the final result, but Ben Askren's longly anticipated UFC debut was a long way from what fans expected. Joining the UFC after the sport's first interpromotional trade, fans were excited to see how Askren would fare against the UFC's elite welterweight division. Being a former Bellator and one welterweight champion and also boasting an undefeated record, Ben Askren wasted no time in calling out most of the welterweight division, seeming very eager to cement himself amongst the UFC roster.
We're gonna have 20-0 Ben Askren versus 27-0 Khabib. Someone's O's gotta go, America versus Russia. I will get on his back and I will chant USA.
However, when he made his debut against Robbie Lawler at UFC 235, things didn't go as smoothly as expected. Askren tries to implement his renowned grappling game from the start, only to be slammed himself by Lawler. It's here we see Askren very nearly finish from Robbie's ruthless ground and pound, before finally finding his way to safety. Shortly after, Askren wins the fight via a bulldog choke. Only when referee Herb Dean intervened, Lawler shoots up protesting he wasn't out, leading to one of the biggest controversial decisions in UFC history. Despite the win, many fans were disappointed with the debut, expecting a more dominant game from the newly acquired star. Luke Rockhold. When Luke Rockhold joined the UFC from Strikeforce back in 2013, there was a lot of hype surrounding the middleweight. Having left Strikeforce with a 9-1 record and his last two fights being title defenses, many thought a win over Vitor Belfort at UFC on FX would put Rockhold straight into title contention. However, Rockhold's debut against seasoned UFC vet Vitor Belfort would not go as originally planned. Halfway through the first round, Belfort throws a spinning kick which connects with Rockhold's shin, sending him to the canvas, before Vitor Belfort would secure his victory with some savage strikes to the grounded Rockhold. While Rockhold's stock seemingly dropped after the fight, he went on a 4-fight winning streak before defeating Chris Weidman for the UFC middleweight title at UFC 194. James Toney. In a bizarre signing that confused many, former champion boxer James Toney joined the UFC on a multi-fight contract. Toney made his interest known at UFC 108, where he seemed to gatecrash Dana White's interview with Ariel Helwani.
I don't think so. Listen, like I said,
It's on UFC.
At the time of the interview, Toney and the UFC were seemingly unable to come to a deal, but that changed in 2010 when the deal finally came to fruition.
and I signed him, and I don't know what I'm going to do with him now.
His debut would be against no other than Randy Couture. James Toney, however, didn't seem fazed, stating many times that he could defeat any of the UFC's top stars. His words, however, would come back to bite the boxer, as he was taken down early and submitted in the first round via arm triangle. This would be James Toney's first and only MMA bout. Sean the Cannon Gannon. Sean Gannon is the name some of you may recognize as the cop who beat Kimbo Slice in one of his famed bare-knuckle fights. Well, a lesser known or forgotten fact is that Sean the Cannon Gannon actually competed in the UFC back in 2005, facing Brandon Lee Hinkle. There was some hype to the fight, with many spectators tuning in to see the man who took Kimbo's throne. Unfortunately, Gannon's YouTube fame didn't live up to the expectations, as the Boston police officer was quickly taken down in the first round, and offered no answers to Hinkle's vicious ground and pound. Despite his loss, Gannon should still be commended for going out there in the first place, as it takes a lot of heart to get out there in the octagon. Cindy Dandois. Cindy Dandois was a highly touted prospect from Antwerp, Belgium. Competing between the weights of bantamweight and featherweight, Dandois was hugely respected for her judo and wrestling skill set, which showed in her 8-2 record leading to her UFC debut. Booked to fight Alexis Davis at UFC Nashville, many were excited to see Dandois compete in the big leagues, some even predicting she could be a future champion. At Fight Day, however, fans were disappointed to see the lackluster bout in which Davis would grind out a decision victory. Many took to social media to criticize Cindy Dandois striking afterwards, and she was never seen in the UFC again. Despite this setback, Dandois has found success outside of the UFC, winning 7 out of her 9 fights afterwards. Hollis Gracie Jr. When Hollis Gracie was announced as the newest addition to the UFC heavyweight division, fans went crazy. The Gracie name is perhaps one of the most recognizable in the sport, and Hollis had big shoes to fill in order to live up to the family name. After his original opponent withdrew due to visa issues, Gracie wound up facing Joey Beltran at UFC 109. Fans heavily favored Gracie, which was reflected in the betting odds of the fight, having Beltran as the massive underdog at plus 633. However, those who were lucky enough to bet on Beltran were more than joyous after Gracie gassed out in the first round, and was consequently finished in the second after Beltran landed 15 shots to Gracie's head. Gracie's performance met a lot of criticism, including that of Renzo Gracie, who stated that Hollis's performance was embarrassing. Hollis was also released from the UFC after his debut and never fought for the promotion again. Gray Maynard. Gray Maynard is a name most fans remember for his epic trilogy with Frankie Edgar and his run on The Ultimate Fighter 5. In this entry on our list, we'll be looking at the Ultimate Fighter finale, where Maynard would face Rob Emerson, which would end in a way nobody could have imagined. In the second round of the fight, Maynard has Emerson up against the cage and viciously slams him into the canvas. But here's the twist. Upon doing so, Maynard doesn't just finish his opponent, he actually knocks himself out as his head rifles to the canvas. The fight was declared a no contest, much to the frustration of Maynard.
I want to win. I don't want a no contest. If a guy beats my ass, that's fine. Okay, that's it. But, I want to win.
Brock Lesnar versus Frank Mir, 1. Former UFC heavyweight champion Brock Lesnar didn't have the best start to his time in the promotion. Debuting back at UFC 81 against Frank Mir, many suggested Lesnar was out of his depth. Frank Mir was a well-established name within the MMA scene and had a strong resume of victories backing him. Lesnar, on the other hand, had just one professional win and a successful wrestling career at the University of Minnesota. As the two finally stand opposite the cage from one another, the size difference clearly in Lesnar's favor, Lesnar secures a takedown quickly, but hits Mir to the back of the head, losing Brock a point and forcing the fight to the feet. Lesnar drops Mir again and looks impressive before his overconfidence gets the better of him, and he finds himself unfortunately submitted by the grappling specialist. The two would later meet again at UFC 100, where Brock would get his revenge and defend his heavyweight title. Diego Lima. Diego Lima, brother of Bellator welterweight champion Douglas Lima, was hoping for success of his own and intended on doing it in the world's biggest organization, the UFC. Entering the Ultimate Fighter 19 in the middleweight division, Lima impressed on the road to the final, defeating 2 of his 3 opponents by submission, and fans were excited to see his official debut against Eddie Gordon in the middleweight finals. Unfortunately, however, things did not go well for Lima. Gordon pressured Lima almost immediately, dropping him with heavy strikes before finishing him off with punches. Lima would go 1-3 in his first stint in the UFC, before he returned again in the Ultimate Fighter Redemption series. CM Punk. In arguably one of the most highly publicized debuts of all time, former WWE star CM Punk announced his venture into MMA. Fans of both sports were left a little confused by the decision. MMA fans were more so, taking to social media to criticize the decision some saw as a publicity stunt. With Twitter in meltdown, fans would soon start to begin speculating on who CM Punk's first opponent would be, and soon enough, that man would soon make himself known. During Dana White's Looking for a Fight series, Mickey Gall, who had just won his debut on the show, called out CM Punk. Gall would later make his own UFC debut, and would make quick work of Mike Jackson before calling Punk out again in the post-fight interview.
Last time I was on the mic talking about one guy, and I'm still thinking about one guy. I want to be fed, I'm hungry. Feed me CM Punk, please!
With interest building, the fight was eventually booked for UFC 203. Eager eyes tuned in to see if Punk could make the transition into the sport, and they found out what they needed to, quite early on. Seemingly a little nervous and inexperienced, Punk was submitted in round 1. He would later return to fight Mike Jackson, but was also defeated this time via decision. This fight also drew some criticism, leading Dana White to announce that both fighters were done in the UFC.
No, it probably should be a wrap, The guy's 39 years old. I love the guy. He's the nicest guy in the world. Yeah, I think you should call it a wrap.
That's just about gonna wrap it up for our list of 10 of the worst UFC debuts. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to hit the like button down below. There is a lot of content we can't fit into these videos, so be sure to let us know anything you'd like to see in a future one. Here's our favorite comments from the last video. Maestro Orochi said, awesome video bro, most of the channel only puts UFC's material, it sucks. Greetings from Chile. Thanks man, glad you enjoyed it. We'll make sure to post MMA content that's not just from the UFC. Northern Rider Off-Road said, I was backstage at the Lima Page fight. That was a great night of fights. And this is kind of cheating, but lastly I wanted to thank everyone who's commented on the last videos. We've gotten a ton of feedback and support and we couldn't do this without you guys. If you want your comment to be featured in the next video, be sure to comment on this one. Special thanks to Lucas for editing the video and Kali for writing the script. See you in the next video.